on your, and then on the, you can get rid of that YouTube live control panel thing. I assume you've got YouTube up
Open
in
it.
a,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So the
you
question is,
should.
why isn't it seeing the video, the webcam? Mm,
Oh, you've got to capture the window. Okay, over there where it says sources,
yeah.
hit plus.
Window capture. Is
Uh,
that the one?
well, I use yeah, window capture. That'll work. Hit OK, and then select a window. Find the one that's the right
Uh,
live streaming YouTube Studio Brave. Is that the one? Nope. Uh, Studio Linux OTC Discord. Okay. Um, go ahead and disconnect. There's a button in the bottom right corner that disconnects the video from the rest of Discord.
what on the Discord bit?
Yeah, yeah. Let me see. Let me bring it back to Discord so I can. Yeah, bottom right. It looks like a box with an arrow pointing out of it.
Yeah.
Hit that one, and then maximize it. Now go back to OBS.
Pop out. All right, I've got it popped out. Then I'll go maximize. Yeah. Then back to OBS.
And then switch that over to the live or Studio Linux OTC Discord. No, find the one for the window that you're live streaming. You might need to go ahead and hit cancel.
And then
Delete that one. Now start over. Hit the plus button. Now do it again. Studio. I bet you that's it. The one that just says studio. Yeah.
yeah, that looks vaguely like it.
Yeah.
So I can now. Okay, so if I put OK for that, and then if I stop streaming this
Yeah.
here, and then put that on, and then put that on. Ta-da!
Cool, huh?
Excellent. Now, how do I know that's actually working on YouTube? Yep, it's up on YouTube. Brilliant. Fantastic.
Cool, huh?
Don't you
Now
just
you're
love
gonna.
it? Don't you just love technology, eh? Isn't it
I
brilliant?
know OBS is a bit of an unwieldy beast to get started with, but once
Mm-hmm.
you get your head wrapped around it, because when you're doing things this way, you've got to make sure that you hear the other person on the desktop audio. You got that audio mixer in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
You want to hear them on the desktop audio, and then your mic slash aux. You want
Yeah,
that to
I
be
saw
you
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because it's not going to pick up you without both of those things on because
So,
it's
do I
two
also have
separate
to
things.
start recording as well on this?
If you want to, that would be just a little bit of redundancy just in case everything goes to hell and
Yeah, yeah.
you need to.
So I shall
And
do
then
that as well.
you want me to start, Craig?
Yes, if you can start, Craig.
Uh, Craig, if you can see what I'm doing here, you just bring up the chat for the room we're in and then just hit / join. Got to hit enter twice.
Now recording.
And now it's recording.
Excellent. Brilliant. Okay, then.
And it creates the in your since I'm the one that started it, it's in my DM list, but the person that starts the Craig recording will get the message in the DMs, which will include the download
Yeah.
link for, and it's a zip file, is
Yeah.
what it is
Yeah.
when
So
you
I
go
remember
to
seeing
download
it.
it.
Yeah. When Leo first did it.
So
So yeah, since you started it, if you send that to me at the end,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I will. I've
cool.
started recording too, just for another layer of redundancy. So
What good old Audacity?
no, just here on OBS. I got OBS running as well.
Okay,
So
that's fine.
no,
Um,
Audacity is an afterthought these days.
yeah, true say, true say. I'm just thinking, should I just leave Audacity then? It's just gonna be one.
I Yeah, I would. You don't really need it until you go to edit the audio after the fact.
Yeah, cool.
Really.
So I'll get rid of that then, because there's something about Audacity that just kind of makes me, because I keep hearing
Eh,
about all the issues that you guys are having with it. So
I mean, it shouldn't be an issue, but I think it's just because we use Linux, and Linux is one of those things that works because we make it work.
mm,
You know, honestly, that we
okay
run
then.
into these strange problems. So
Okay, so I'll do a little bit of spiel at the beginning,
okay,
and then it's basically going to be interview style. Answer what you like. If you don't like want to answer, don't answer. It's absolutely fine. The whole point is just to have an interesting conversation, um, and we'll see how where it goes. A bit kind of. I've got a plan in my head of what I'm going to be asking,
okay,
but from obviously you don't know that, so it's a little bit off the cuff from you. So it makes the whole
love
thing a
it,
bit interesting, I think. Because if I
love it.
tell you all the questions, everything beforehand, then you can probably stress over what you should say and what you shouldn't say. You don't get that,
Exactly.
and you don't get that kind of humanity aspect of it. Do you know what I mean? Of that, there's a human being at
I,
the end of the call, if you know what I mean.
I 100% agree.
Cool. Okay then. So, welcome to the Atypical Doctor podcast. This is season 2. We are restarting, we are renaming. Yes, if this was the atypical anesthetist, but unfortunately, most of you can't spell it properly, and so I've had to change the name slightly. I mean, I'm only being just facetious, but you also want it to be something that people remember. And so, yeah, so we're starting season 2. And my first guest that I've got on is someone who has become a friend of mine over the last, oh, it's coming up to 2 years now, I think, actually.
It
Um,
has.
and Bill from Mincast, Linux OTC, and Three Fat Truckers, a fellow podcaster. So, Bill, how do we find you on this? What in the UK is a sunny evening? I'm assuming it's
I
sunny daytime in the States.
It just so happens to be a sunny day here in this part of the states as well. Um, but yeah, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So, as has always been the format with these episodes, it's a discussion. We talk about stuff. We hope it's interesting and that people want to listen to it. So, and if you do, obviously, you can tell us yay or nay. You can contact us, and we'll put all of that stuff at the end. So, I first came across yourself when I answered a ad stroke plea stroke beg, I don't know how you want to put it, for more hosts on Minkcast. And because the bar is obviously quite low, I was allowed in, and I've been contributing on that. And then you also have Linux OTC, which is a kind of an unscripted podcast. But your first podcast, if I'm correct, was Three Fat Truckers.
Well, no, not exactly. I'd been like listening to podcasts for quite some time, and I remember thinking, "Gosh, that sounds like fun. I'd like to try that." And when, oh, gosh, it was shortly after Leo left Mintcast,
Mm-hmm.
a plea was put out for hosts, and I thought, "Gosh, this is my time to break in on this," because the one thing that I had opinions about enough to be interesting to anybody was about Linux and open source. And so I offered that to the people at Mintcast, and they said, "Yeah, yeah, come on over to the Discord and talk to us." And I didn't know anything about Discord in those days. Um,
I mean, it's interesting actually.
And
My Discord journey has been predominantly through Mintcast as well. I mean, I had the app, but I
yeah,
didn't really kind of engage in any of the different channels and things like that and servers. It's only really since, yeah, Mintcast for me as well.
I think I had heard of it, but I had heard of it like within the context of gaming
Yeah.
because I've heard some younger people talk. You know, it was used as kind of their communication medium when they're streaming games live and stuff like that. And I really hadn't tried it until the whole Mintcast thing. Mintcast uses it. That is their preferred method of communication from top to bottom. They've got a Telegram channel and email and stuff like that, but the Discord is probably the highest volume communication for that particular show. So yeah, I got to talking to those guys and they brought me on. I think episode 377 was my first episode. I could be wrong about that. It was something close to that. And I've just been kind of
It was about mid
I was
2021. Am I right?
it might have been 2020 if I remember right.
Okay.
It was um it's been a while now. But
Okay.
then I remember that kind of okay, that inspired a couple things in me. First off, right away I recognized how stiff of a regimen a show like Mintcast, a very venerable, very old Linux podcast that's been around as long as any of them have within that
Hmm.
sort of space, you know. And it had a format. Well, to this day, it's got a format that people have grown accustomed to, grown comfortable with, and it's tough. I'm not gonna lie. It's a tough one to stick with, and we've gone through a lot of people
Hmm.
over the years. We've gone through a couple just since I've been on the show, and I thought, okay, so what's the philosophical opposite of Midcast? Well, that's when I came up with OTC, which you're a part of. I thought, what if the show leaned on the not so much the stuff we were reading off of our notes, but the opinions and the personalities of the people behind the microphone, and we just talked about whatever was on our mind, and by that virtue alone, the show is just very unorganized. We've never had a topic really
Hmm.
that we knew about that we were going to talk about, when we started the show, and so that was kind of the inspiration behind that. And I think the show's been an awesome success. I've really enjoyed. We're actually recording an episode today. In fact, after
Yep.
we get done with this. So, and then when Majid come along, he was not one of the first people on the show. Originally, it was me and Leo and uh, oh gosh,
Norbert.
another guy, Norbert. He's from Hungary, young guy, very young guy, and when you're young, you've got a lot of things going on, and unfortunately, he wasn't able to stick with it. But then Eric and Majid came along, and it was just I feel like it's the perfect storm on that show of personalities and opinions and the just the right amount of know-how, but yet I think the magic of it is not just the know-how, but the curiosity.
Hmm.
Because there's nothing. I- It's not all that interesting talking to people that know exactly what they're talking about every single time. You know what I mean? You got to have people that are curious about, okay, what do I do next? You got to have people that are willing to be wrong about the things
Yeah.
they're doing, and and I think that was part of what made OTC so popular.
I
Three
mean, do you,
fat
I mean, do you, I
truckers.
mean, do you, I mean, do you have metrics on OTC and popularity and
So
stuff?
OTC is kind of on par with the third show, Three Fat Truckers, in terms of our listenership.
Okay.
Um, we're not monetizing OTC. We did try in the beginning for a little while. We tried monetizing with some programmatic ads, and it was bringing in a little bit of money in the beginning, but people were really uncomfortable with programmatic ads. For people that are not aware, you've got this concept with actual podcast providers where the uh, they'll create ads that are targeted through algorithms at the people that are downloading the show.
Mm-hmm.
And Linux people, for a lot of reasons, tend to be a little bit more scrutinizing, a little bit more conscious of these things. And when like if somebody is in Australia and they get an ad for the Australian police department hiring as they're driving by the Australian police academy or whatever, they get a little spooked out by that kind of thing. And I feel like normal people, and I say normal, I mean anybody that's not in that particular niche of tech, but I don't even know if tech is narrowing it down enough. I think you got to get into the open source sort of Linux world to really drill down to the people that are borderline offended by that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I turned it off. I thought it isn't worth making listeners uncomfortable just to get $25 a month.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, sorry, you were starting about Three Fat Truckers.
Okay, so Three Fat Truckers is the third show that I'm a part of, and what that basically was, um, I'm an American truck driver by trade, which is probably interesting
Yeah,
that
which I'm
somebody,
going to get to as well.
yeah. I'm one of these people that does this thing for a living, but yet I'm also in this other world, and it comes with its challenges. But at any rate, I was excited about that, and nowadays we drivers talk on the phone all day long, and I there was one conversation that it was a three-way call with a couple friends of mine that are actually on the show. And I was excited about being on Mintcast, and I remember somebody saying, "Well, we should start a show. These conversations we have on the phone are sometimes people would probably think are funny and whatnot." And I said, "Well, I mean, the cool thing about podcasting, and this is the thing I love best about podcasting, is the only barrier to entry is what you're willing to learn, what you've got time to learn, what you've got time to implement. Because
Mm-hmm.
beyond that, I mean, if you wanted to run a show with $0 going out, it is possible, and you could distribute a show and even monetize it without a single penny coming out of your pocket if that's the way you wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it morphed from a conversation into a reality within about a week, and now Three Fat Truckers is kind of a thing. We're kind of a staple in the industry, and people know us, and we go to all the major trucking shows and things like that. Um,
So what kind of
could
stuff do you
probably
talk about on there?
Well, it's mostly satire, but we get a lot of articles forwarded to us from some of the news outlets within this industry. There's one called CDL Life, a CDL being what in this country the commercial driver's license, which is the license you need to drive a semi truck or well, there's different levels of it, but it's a colloquial term basically
Mm-hmm.
to that gets applied to things like other podcasts because CDL Life has its own podcast, its own sort of network. It's got its own social networking thing, but we get a lot of news from them that we talk about on the show, and then we give our own because every one of us has been at least. I think I'm the youngest of the three of us, and I've been doing the job for over 30 years. So
Mm-hmm.
we've got some perspective and we talk about things that are happening. And if we get the scoop on something that is coming down the pipe, then we like to talk about that. But it's mostly, again, it's about getting personalities together that are opinionated, but at the same time might, have something clever to say. Uh, we recently brought on we have a lady on the show now because like most shows we struggle with diversity.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be a thing with a lot of shows in podcasting, especially in our little niche where it's difficult to find a balance of diversity, to where you can adequately represent the listenership that you're trying to reach.
I mean, these things are
And
often self-selecting demographics, isn't it? The people who are
yeah,
interested in this kind of thing are generally of one type, and etc. And then after a while, that is a self-fulfilling prophecy in a sense. And however much you try and necessarily be inclusive, certain things are just not going to happen. I have, for example, come across female car mechanics, but not many in my life. It does happen. So I think it's these kinds, without getting political, and I'm going to get political as well. Don't worry.
mhm,
There's only so many things that can be forced. Many things are just human nature. What we should do as a society is to drop any barriers to entry that exist.
yeah,
you know, and then let nature take its course. And if that means that a specific demographic, specific age group prefer one thing, then that's fine, as long as everybody's had the choice and opportunity. It's what in the UK is called the equality of opportunity. It's all about to give everybody the chance. If you don't, and that should be what society should do. I think you can go to the extremes of leaving all the barriers in place and then trying to shoehorn. I mean, I think in the US it's called DEI, isn't it? DEI hires and all this kind of stuff. And I think sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't work. But yes, before we get into all of that, people often ask me, you're a doctor, you're an anesthesiologist. What are you doing on a Linux podcast? Right? What are you doing all this for? So let me kind of say something similar to you. You're a trucker. You've been for 30 years. You're an army veteran. Um, how did you end up here in Linux?
I thought about that question because I thought, okay, he's going to ask how on earth I ended up on Linux from the line of work that I'm in. And um I think how I ended up being interested in computers, period, is probably a good way to start with that, because what ended up happening in the early 2000s, I went through a period where, I mean, I've always felt, I don't mind admitting it, I felt like maybe I was too smart for what I was doing, because I was really struggling finding my place in this line of work, because it didn't seem like anybody thought the way I did or talked the way I did. And I felt kind of, like if I don't find my way, I'm going to be stuck forever. And so I went back to school in the early 2000s and ended up getting a couple of degrees, and um
So
they
did that
were in
so did that come first or the trucking come first?
the trucking. I started trucking actually in the army in
Okay.
1990. uh, I just basically ended up by chance driving a truck because uh, I was driving every now and then for the job that I had in the army. But then when Bill Clinton got into office, I was overseas in Germany, and there was a period of time where they wanted to start shipping everything that we had been accumulating overseas, particularly in Germany, back to the United States. And this was all because of buildup after World War II. And it was a huge job because we had been building up stockpiles of this, that, and the other, mostly ammunition, since the end of World War II. And as of 1992, he wanted it all back stateside within 4 years. Huge job.
Mm-hmm.
And so they needed a lot of drivers. Well, the first pool of people that they chose from to drive the trucks were the German citizens, the civilians. The second pool was American service members who had uh, private driver's license.
Mhm.
And that was me right there because I was actually married over there. I had a license to drive just personal vehicle, and so that made it a little easier to get started with because you knew the local traffic laws and that. And then after serving time doing that, came back home and decided that that's my first wife, the one I was married to at the time. I was struggling to find something I wanted to do after the army. She said, "Well, you enjoyed driving trucks, so why don't you just do that?" Long story about getting into that line of work after the military, but that's kind of what got me started in that.
Mhm.
Fast forward to 2002, um, been struggling many years. I wanted to be in the states. Law enforcement is divided up by you've got an echelon that does the federal law enforcement, the FBI, and other agencies, and that each state's got a state police, and then county and city beyond that.
Mhm.
And I wanted to be a state trooper from the time I was a little kid. I just thought they were cool.
Mhm.
And so I went to school to because they were requiring I thought they were requiring a 2-year degree to do that. And I was almost in my 30s. I thought, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it now. I go back to school and it became obvious right away, even in the early 2000s, you had to have a computer to do your homework.
Mhm.
Everything was being done on computers at that point. And so I bought one with a student loan and I barely knew how to turn it on, had Windows XP on it. And I couldn't tell you what it was about getting that thing to do stuff that it wasn't necessarily built to do. The I don't know, the satisfaction of installing things on it and getting it running um, started getting me sort of interested in
Mhm.
open source and I don't know if you've ever explained that on your show or not. Open source is kind of this concept of software that has a license that can be viewed and manipulated by anybody.
Mhm.
Um,
I think manipulate
and
is a
I
strong word. More that can be used and adapted to whatever it is that you like to do with it.
and depending on the license, redistributed,
Yeah.
in the way that you've changed it. And I kind of latched onto that way of thinking because I started to come around to this, through my education and things. I started coming around to this idea of a better world. The definition of a better world is someplace where people are able to uh, freely share their strengths, the things that they are good at, the contributions that they can make in return for the contributions that other people can make. I might be describing communism. I really don't mean to. Um,
I was going to make that joke, but
and
I thought I'd wait a bit.
and so I started really kind of getting into the philosophy of open source and Linux. And then when I in those days, the only barrier to Linux for me was the fact that well, at the time we were still using America Online, which was a dial-up
Yeah.
service, and I was definitely not sharp enough to get a dial-up modem working on Linux in those days. But then as time went on, um, it started becoming more obvious that you could use Linux to do most things that people need to do with a computer. You just had to be willing to do a little bit of learning
Hmm.
and figure these things out yourself and get it working. And I don't know. I think part of it for me is just the fascination. I think I mentioned this on the last episode of OTC. The fascination that I'm smart enough to do this and I had no idea prior to that what I was capable of with
Hmm.
these things,
Hmm.
and I guess I just kind of got addicted to that idea that here I am doing, I'm an American truck driver and I'm smart enough to install Linux on a machine and get all these complicated things running and that.
So what would you
And so
use? So what were you using Linux and open source software for? I mean, obviously now you're doing a lot of podcasting and stuff like that. But what were you? Was there any specific productivity things that you did? Were you, I don't know, video editing, audio editing, photo editing?
no,
What were you?
no, none of none of that until I started podcasting, and then I had to take the crash course on video and audio editing. Now, prior to that, it was I was like maintaining media libraries and things like that was some of the biggest things I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I was using tools like Handbrake and Make MKV to maintain a legally acquired library of uh, media files that
Mm-hmm.
I would serve up to our TV in the living room using Kodi on a Raspberry Pi or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was buying Raspberry Pis from the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and that was probably the biggest like use I was getting. But beyond that, like anything I was using it for, like paying bills online, just normal stuff
General
people would open
computing.
it. Just general computing, yeah. I was cool with the idea that I'm just using it to do the things that people normally do with a computer because, that it was once we got past the whole thing with the dial-up modem and now we've got a constantly on, yeah, young people. There was a time, listen to grandpa speak now. There was a time when your internet was not always turned on. You had to dial it up
Yeah.
and it didn't work so well with Linux, but because the software for all these things was written for Windows. And once we got past all that, then Linux pretty much filled the requisite for what normal people needed to use it for. Um, there was a little bit of challenge getting things like Netflix to work on it in that in early days, but we're most people have trouble remembering a time when there was really any challenge. You've got a reasonable expectation nowadays that you can install Linux on most machines, especially if a machine has been around for a year or so.
Mm-hmm.
You can install it and do most of the things that normal people would want to do, shopping and watching Netflix and stuff like that. Which, I mean, most of the time for normal people, and when I say normal people, I mean people that are not interested in these things quite to the degree that you and I are. They get interested when I show them. They'll tell me, "Yeah, I've got a computer, but it's been sitting around for a couple
Yeah.
years, and it
The
and it
the
really
resurrection
runs
of old
slow."
hardware, basically, isn't
Yeah,
it?
well, that's still a thing.
Oh yeah,
I
I
know a
know.
lot of Linux people. A lot of Linux people would really like to rise above all that, but the reality is that is still very much alive and well. And we people,
I mean, I actually think it's one of the big selling points. Actually,
it
I
is.
mean, the idea that you've got this crumbly, old, slow machine, which is basically not fit for purpose, and then using a different operating system, it suddenly becomes a useful piece of technology that can be used. Is it perfect? No, of course not. Will you be able to do everything that the latest 1,000, 1,500 pound laptop, MacBook Pro, whatever can do? No, of course not. But it brings life back to something which you thought was basically dead. The problem, I suppose, does come with because of some of the issues that follow Linux around, such as specific compatibility with files and programs, and then battery life and things like that. But the idea that you had this lump of plastic, which was just going to be e-waste, really, and now you can use it and use it a bit longer. I mean, I just always found that fascinating, and it to me anyway, it gave me this sense of indignation that why the hell can't the companies do this? Why have they made operating systems and software and all this that is frankly so rubbish that after a couple of years, just for that reason, not because your hard drive has failed or your CPU's burnt out, but for software reasons, you're being forced to buy something else? And it's like, I I just don't think that's right. Do you know what I mean? There's a bit of you could call it self righteousness, I suppose. But I mean, there is a I do that used to grind my gears quite a bit. And I was like, there's so much stuff that you could do. Now, I suppose I understand there is such a thing as planned obsolescence. If something worked perfectly and it works perfectly for a long period of time, why would you buy anything new? And then how's the company going to make money? You know. So I do understand that's how businesses work, but yeah, I mean that used to really get me, and that's what when I was starting off on my Linux journey, I remember that feeling.
I think I'm not saying that I give companies like Microsoft credit for things like this, but I think it's worth noting that Microsoft has been in business for a long time and they've gotten to know their customer base, and their customer base is people that just want their machine to fire up and do the thing that they want it to do. And they also know that they've got an awful lot of customers running an awful lot of legacy software
Hmm.
that needs to just work. And for everything that we say about Microsoft, their claim to fame is that if you've got a piece of software that was written for Windows 3.1 back in the 80s, 90s, whatnot, you can install it on Windows 11 and you have a reasonable expectation that it's going to work.
Hmm.
That is not the case necessarily on Linux, pound for pound. You're not just going to install
Or
this
Mac
thing
as
on
well,
Linux
actually, or Mac
or
as well.
Mac because you've got this with Windows. You've got this concept of backwards compatibility where old software, and there's an awful lot of old software being ran. I mean, yeah, I'm sure you know from the
Mm.
medical industry, there's got to be a lot of old legacy stuff that it's difficult in any industry that's not like tech at its base to get them to see the value of upgrading a piece of software that has been working and continues to work, to do the thing that they're doing that makes them the money. If that's not broke, then why fix it? And I think Microsoft understands their customer in that way. They have to provide a product that will maintain the kind of backwards compatibility, and that's going to come with. I'm really trying not to sound like a Microsoft shill here, but
Yeah,
it's
no, but I
it's
mean,
really hard.
I mean, you have to be fair, isn't it?
Yeah,
You might have problems with anybody or anything, but at the same time, you've got to be fair, logical, and consistent. Because actually,
right,
that's what uh, it helps the person making the argument. If the person you're talking to, you know that person's being fair, objective, and consistent. And if calling out somebody for one thing and then not calling out something else for exactly the same thing just because they're on your side of a debate or your side of an ideological line,
right.
that's a bit of that's intellectual dishonesty, frankly. And that applies to many things, whether we're talking about technology, whether we're talking about politics, whether you're talking about sport, whatever it is you want to talk about. You have to be fair, consistent, and logical, and you have to have, if you have standards for one thing, those have to follow for other things. So for example, as an example, we can't sit here and say shit on Microsoft and Apple when other companies whose devices we may use, such as I've always been an Android user. I'm using Firefox and things like that. When they do stuff which is also questionable, you have to call them out as well. You can't just say that, well, I'm on this side of the fence, and so therefore everything my side said is great, and what your side say is wrong. I think that's a fair rule for life in general. It definitely works in tech.
It does, because if Microsoft made the same kind of choices that Linux made, then they just would not they would not hold the dominant place in the market as they do,
Yeah.
because in Linux we have the ability or the luxury of completely nuking certain technologies and moving on to the next thing. And you've got a couple choices. You're either keeping up, or nowadays you're using like long-term support type installations and stuff like that in order to maintain old code bases. There's other solutions to that, like containerization in Linux, where you can package up everything an application needs in order to work with that application. That way, if like Python's a big example of that. Python's moved on to like version 3, and then the version 2 has been completely nuked off of most
Mm-hmm.
systems, but yet there's still software out there that depends on Python 2 for this reason or that. Well, if you just tried to install that on a Linux machine, it just wouldn't work if it installed at all. That's the kind of, I'm not sure if that makes sense to normal people, but it's just that in within the
You can do stuff when money isn't an issue.
yeah,
If
money and
if you have a business and that business relies on a particular customer and a particular uh, what's the word I'm looking for?
you have a certain
You
mandate.
have particular aims, you have particular
Yeah.
needs, you have particular services that you're offering. And even if you want things to change, you can't, because you, at the end of the day, have to go where the customer is. I mean, it's the example of, I always think it's very telling that, everybody shouts about how great Apple is and how everybody's imitating MacBooks and iPhones. And there's truth to that. I'm not denying it. But at the end of the day, the Mac market share has never gone beyond 15% ever. And why is that? Because their install base, their user demographic is the consumer, the person who goes into a shop and says they want a laptop. Well, let's be honest, the majority of people who use computers is enterprise, is hospitals and factories and businesses and stuff like that. And that's why. And whatever, I mean, Apple has no interest, it seems, to going even into that niche. But every once in a while they'll say stuff which will make you think that they're going that way. They'll release a Mac Pro for an obscenely high amount of price, or a Mac Studio with 80 GPU cores, I think I heard last week, for creatives and stuff like that. And yet 15%, being, them.
And
And
it's interesting because the people that use Macs and iPhones are completely uninterested in the things that irritate Linux people about
oh
the
yeah,
ecosystem
it's like
that
it's like the
Mac
complete
sits in.
other end of the
Yeah.
technological spectrum, you know.
And that's just another example of a company that knows their customer base to the point where they understand the things that are important to them, and they cater to a customer that expects things to work without any sort of surprises
Mm-hmm.
whatsoever. And that is valuable because I dare say, and I'm not trying to be condescending, but people that use an iPhone do not expect the kind of quirks that you have with an Android. Sometimes Android just has certain things that happen at times that I don't really have a good explanation for,
Mm-hmm.
behaviors
Yeah.
that I really, and you don't get much of that on an iPhone, on an ecosystem where one company controls the hardware and software stack at the exact same time. And
Although interestingly, I was watching uh, Linus from Linus Tech Tips. He's giving himself a MacBook challenge. He's never
mm,
had a Mac OS device. He's always been a Windows user or a Linux user. And so he did a good 40-minute rant on one of their shows about how buggy the latest version of Mac OS was, and how there was all sorts of just little stupid things, like if you changed your touchpad from natural scrolling to normal scrolling, it would change it for your mouse as well, even though your mouse is, not your touchpad, and all these kinds of little buggy things. And he said the same thing a couple of months earlier when he was doing his iPhone 16 challenge of there's just too many random bugs, and which made me think Apple obviously at some point was the company that had stuff that just worked. But maybe they're kind of now just going on the perception that their stuff just works, and actually, it's as buggy as anything else. I don't know,
well,
because
I
I don't
wonder.
because I don't use stuff Well, not
Yeah,
anymore.
I
So
don't
from my
either, and I'm just as curious as you. I wonder though if a lot of that is because you're even Linus from Linus Tech Tips. He's the kind of individual that would go and change the mouse settings.
yeah.
And I wonder if the average Mac user, the kind of person that goes and spends the money on the Mac, and that, they're content creators or graphic designers or whatnot, and they're using a Mac for that. If they're the kind of people that go and make changes like
Mm-hmm.
that, we're more of tech people for the sake of tech, and we want to go and we want to make this thing. We basically want to turn it into Windows, or we want to turn it into Linux. We make it
The way that we see
behave,
fit.
yeah, behave the way that we expect based on our own expectations. And it turns out that it doesn't want to behave that way. It might give us the option to change it that way, but like you described with you really only have the option to change every input device to behave this way, not like a granular,
Yeah.
or it might be granular, but it changes everything at the same time, and then you got to go through and make granular changes for different devices or whatnot, and I wonder if that's like from the perspective of a Windows user, or if we was to go and look at that, if we'd be if the things that we would find interesting or irritating would be from the perspective of a Linux user, and of those Linux users, dare I say, Linux podcasters,
Mm-hmm.
people that have made it a point to talk about the opinions we have about these things. Uh, if
Interesting.
maybe our perspective is a little different from somebody that just goes and buys a Mac because it just happens to be the best piece of kit for creating content with. I don't
Yeah.
know, because
Yeah.
I've only got this one perspective. That's the trouble with being human. We can only see it from our own eyes, I suppose.
So after you'd done these kind of technology computing courses and found yourself interested in this industry, was there ever the thing in your mind of I'm going to leave trucking and going into IT? Did that ever come to you?
Uh, I would love to. I cannot move. I've worked my way into sort of the top end of the wage scale in this line of work, and for where I live, it's considerable. And I have no, other than the servers I maintain for the podcasts that I do, I don't have any documentable uh, kind of work experience to
Mm-hmm.
to go by. And so I would be starting, if I was given any opportunity at all, I'd be starting at the very bottom. And I've still got 3 kids living at home. I've got two that have been grown up for some time. One just turned 32 last week, uh, and then the other three are still living at home.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to make a career change, but it'll probably be at least another 6-7 years before I'm in a place to go from basically $100,000 a year job down to 50 or $60,000 a year, just
Mm-hmm.
because you got to start at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. So
And I would also probably have to move. I live in the Midwest, and hmm, this is very red and blue collar where I live. So I'd have to get in the car and drive somewhere and pitch a tent
mm,
somewhere else to actually make the kind of career change I need to make, because it's different parts of the country have very different cultures. Here in the states, it's really interesting, um,
yeah,
how
I mean,
different.
I think Joe on Mincast, I think we talked about this once when we're on the show, as the three of us with the others, that part of the reason that we do this, we're podcasting about technology and all that sort of stuff, is because it's nothing to do with our work.
Yeah,
At least for me, it's an escape from going to hospital, seeing patients, doing surgeries, doing anesthesia, you know, doing management stuff, organizing services, stuff which I like. I'm not gonna, cry about my job. I enjoy my job. I love my job. I'm very grateful to God that I've ended up where I've ended up. But you need something that's nothing to do with it as well, as almost like a palate cleanser. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Something that you can then, you know, get interested and just enjoy it for the sake of it, rather than the fact that there's a paycheck coming in. Because nearly everybody, I mean, and you must have had the same situation as well. The minute you start telling people that you're a podcaster, they say, "Oh, are you making any money out of it?" And like,
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's like, no. So well, why not? It's like, because I don't want to. What do you mean you don't want to? Okay, if you want to do it, you have to do it properly. And if you're going to do it properly, it's basically a full-time job. You have to be, you know, there's more than enough YouTube videos out there talking about how YouTube creators, as an example, you know, have burnt out, and you know how, you know, the grind, and you know, waking up at 2 in the morning and stressing over your viewing stats, and etc. etc. Um, but you know, and I don't want that. I enjoy this. I enjoy this. You know, coming and chatting, whether it's chatting technology with you guys or chatting on the more esoteric topics that I do on this podcast. Um, you know, and so I think, yeah, why would you want to have work and targets and projects and deadlines and stuff like that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and you can fall into that trap with podcasting. Um, but the thing that I love most about podcasting is you do have this concept of providing value, while at the same time you don't necessarily have to have an expectation that you're going to make any money at it. Because that's, I mean, that's the trap we're kind of falling into with Three Fat Truckers, is that we are starting to develop an expectation, because we've become kind of a more and more as time goes on, we've become kind of a mainstay in the whole ecosystem of trucking and news and trucking and things like that. And it's in a lot of ways it's turning into a job. We're expected to show up at truck shows, you know, when something is happening in the industry. We're kind of expected to talk about that, and it's good to have when that happens. It's a good idea to start another show, I think, just to separate yourself and remind yourself, you know, you got into this because you have something you want to share,
Yeah.
or you enjoy talking about this thing with other people, and this is your way of basically sealing your inhumanity, so to speak.
Mhm.
These words that we're speaking right now on this show are going to sustain beyond us. This is an echo in eternity, as long as the uh,
Ooh, I'm feeling all
internet is
Martin Luther
around.
King now. Ooh, yeah, you know.
Yeah,
I have a
it
dream.
absolutely, it is the case. You know, this is wisdom and or entertainment and or commentary that will kind of echo throughout, as long as anybody is interested in hearing it or seeing it. You know, because we put it out there, and we have this expectation that it will stay around as long as the medium of the internet, or whatever the internet sort of evolves into, you
Mhm.
know, stays around. And I think about those things, and I appreciate those things, that this is me sharing part of who and what I am in a way that will uh, transcend my natural life, you
Mm,
know,
that's quite
because
that that's
you know
quite
what I mean.
uplifting and positive. And I suppose, as being the usual Brit, I have to bring that down with some sarcasm, which I'm not going to actually. I'm not going to. But I do want to talk about one thing though, which I do find interesting, which is, here's yourself, an army veteran, a
Mm.
trucker living in a red state.
Oh, here it comes.
Yes, it does. How on earth are you a Democrat?
Um, you know, I don't necessarily consider myself one thing or the other. And that's the thing that has irritated me most about recent politics, is that you are expected to fall in line on one thing or another. And the truth is, I've never met a single human being that I disagreed with every single thing that they said. I've also never met a single human being that I agreed with every single thing that they've said.
Mm-hmm.
But now, in living where I live, without like coming right out and taking a side, uh, I'll just describe that there is this expectation that if you are on the side of those who are in power at present, you are you are on their side 100%. There is no room for you to say, you know what, I sort of agree with this thing over here. I just hate the way they're going about it. You have to be completely bought in from top to bottom to everything that they're doing. And if you are not, then you are perceived as being for the other side. And that really irritates me to no end. Because there's no what happens is that it removes all room for any sort of critical conversation about, okay, I wouldn't choose to do it this way. Maybe let's talk about doing it this way. Well, you're either on the Trump train or you're not.
Hmm.
That is the reality of the political climate that we're in, is that you either are for it or against it. And honestly, yeah, I'll admit as time goes on, I'm more and more. I mean, I always was against it because I don't like a world where people are kept separated, and I don't like a world where all of this bullying and nationalism is the norm. And I've always sort of appreciated the utopian sort of thing that you see in some sci-fi movies, which I know that makes me sound naive, but this concept of a human world where people are pooled together and resources are brought together to make
Hmm.
things happen. Why can't that work? Well, it can't work because people that take power, they've got their own agendas in mind, and it's their job is to try to sell that agenda to the normal people.
Hmm.
And when normal people buy into these concepts without any evidence whatsoever, like if you went around where I live right now, it bothers me deeply that people are so delighted with everything that's going on, absolutely delighted with everything that's going on, and it's all because it's being sold to them as we're finally sticking up for the normal people. We're finally draining the swamp. We're getting rid of the bloat, the corrupt bureaucratic government that has been the mechanism that has been holding back American life for so long. When in actuality, the reality is none of this is actually happening. Um, it's been, for the most part, by and large, a big show.
Hmm.
I'm humiliated because a lot of people I talk to, they don't really have a lot of conversation with people outside the United States. I get humiliated because I do talk to people outside the United States, and here I am, an American, um,
Yeah. I mean,
and
I can imagine it gets very difficult trying to defend the indefensible if you had
it,
to, or
I,
just, being the what it might feel like being the lone person telling people to go the other way while everybody is running towards jumping off the cliff, you know.
it's particularly difficult when you are straddling two worlds like I am right now, because I'll come out and admit this, and then I'm never going to admit it again. I have to be two people in some ways because I'm doing a podcast where I'm uh, trying to be the man's man for an industry that is at its core very American, national, red-blooded, and as within that context, you've got a lot of conservative thought processes. I'm in that world firmly, but at the same time, here I am in this world,
Hmm.
that is populated by uh, learned people, people that actually read and think outside of their world. And uh, it's, I'm not going to lie, it's kind of difficult sometimes
Oh
because
yeah.
I have to, I have to be these two people,
Mm-hmm.
or at least I have to exist in these two worlds. And it can be, it can be a little overwhelming at times
Mm-hmm.
because, when it comes to it, it doesn't often, the conversations we have, like on Three Fat Truckers, we try to, it's been our goal from the beginning to avoid politically divisive topics, because even in that industry that you will have people that um, take one side or the other, uh, and we try to avoid things that will divide our audience.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we just would rather avoid any kind of drama like that on the show. But at the same time, people's opinions tend to come out, and here's me just kind of sitting back, kind of nodding my head while everybody else speaks, and I've got to keep it to myself, because if I spoke, I run the risk of losing a lot of listenership, and a lot of people would probably say, well, good, you don't want those people listening to you. Well, the reality of life is it's not really that simple. I
No, no.
can't
I
just
mean,
think of myself.
yeah, you can't be in an echo chamber.
You can't.
Yeah, yeah. You can't be always preaching to the converted, as it were. You know, if you So there's a band that I follow called the Manic Street Preachers, right? A band from South Wales, and they have been famous during their very long career of writing songs which seem very poppy, middle of the road, American rock style, but their content has been very, very different. Songs which talk about being working class and how getting educated brings you power, or dealing with loss and things like that. And people sing along to the songs and because they sound cool, but people don't actually know what they're about, and they're actually talking some quite meaningful stuff. And whenever they've been interviewed and they talk about it, they say, well, if you believe something and you have a particular view of the world, whatever that might be, you want to tell as many people as possible. If you want to sit in your basement and come out with the most extreme heavy metal that only you would listen to, then only about two people are going to listen to it. And then you're never going to get a chance to change people's minds or get people to think. There's no point.
Right.
As I said, there's no point preaching to the converted. In fact, that's actually a line from one of their songs. I'm no longer preaching to the converted. That congregation has long since been abandoned. Something like that. It goes. You know.
I think the danger you run into, like in America, in nationalist America, there's kind of this feeling among working class people that the educated elite is not to be trusted. They are people that will willfully obscure things in an effort to keep working class people sort of tamped down, because they might not understand certain things. That not that this is a reality, but this is a perception. Um, and so it's difficult to try to keep from sounding like what they call the educated elite, because you start, as they say, you start throwing a lot of big words and a lot of hard little words around, then you end up sounding like one of them, and then you immediately lose everybody's attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it is difficult, because if you, no matter what side you take, you do end up talking in an echo chamber, um, because the people that are gonna like the people that are gonna consume the things you're saying are going to be the ones that agreed with like the first two or three sentences that came out of your
Mm-hmm.
mouth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because everybody else is going to shut it off because they just don't want to hear it, because you're just another blowhard that is on the other side, that's a California liberal or something like
Yeah.
that, or an East Coast liberal, as they say. And so it's really difficult. you almost have to you almost have to hide your true opinions about things inside of other things that you say. I don't have an example of that
No, but I know exactly what you
necessarily.
mean actually, because as in season one, as I have discussed my own religious journeys, I found
Mm,
myself on one side, from one end of the uh, religious spectrum to another. I won't say much more without get because you'll get very confusing. Um, and I've done 2 or 3 episodes on it already. But the point being that obviously there are people that I've known for a very long time who are close friends of mine who are from the other camp, as it were, and I still want to maintain relationships with them because they're still good friends of mine. They're people that I've been through shit with, and you just realize what it is that you talk about and what it is you don't talk about. You can't have a conversation. In your mind that if we start talking about X, Y, and Z, it's going to just degenerate into an argument. So let's just not talk about X, Y, and Z. Let's talk about A, B, C instead. I
hmm
mean, I'm not talking about the TV channel. Um, and I think it become, you could almost call it compartmentalizing. You could almost call it a case of, this is what I'm going to talk to, and this is how I'm going to be with this certain group of people, and which is also true. It's also part of my authentic self, to use a kind of hippie term. But at the same time, talking other things with other people with whom you have who are in a different compartment, for example. And that's probably the only way you can kind of still stay true to yourself.
Yeah.
Because yes, if the compartments mix, you are going to find yourself to being forced to being on one side, which you don't want to be.
No.
I've had this, when I've been out, for example, with a meal, and then I run into some friends from a different place or whatever, and then the guys I'm with are kind of like, you know these guys? And yeah, I know these guys. Oh, and they're like looking at me going, I didn't know you know these guys. Yes, I do. You know what I mean? It's a bit. I don't want to get more specific into it just because it gets very long and complicated. But I think sometimes you do have to compartmentalize a little bit, and maybe
You do.
and
Because I truly don't know what divides people more, religion or politics. And now we live in a day and age where those two things are sort of artificially put together,
hmm,
uh, especially, in American culture where it's almost like you cannot be considered Christian unless you are voting Republican. It is absolutely ridiculous.
hmm,
And at the same time, um, if you consider yourself Christian, you're sort of on the other side of the argument. If you appear as though you are interested in what is considered to be old-fashioned Christian values here in the United States, or even old-fashioned values of many religions, actually, then the left-leaning people will sort of reject you
yeah,
for that reason too. So you do, like as you say, compartmentalize, and you have to find something else interesting to talk about, and that is an art form because some of these people, that is the only thing they really want to talk about. And I've got a couple of friends of mine that I'm picturing right now that are well aware of my left of center sort of opinions when it comes to both of those things. Uh, and yet they still find me an interesting person to talk to because I will try to see. That's the thing. You have to respect that person for their beliefs,
mm-hmm.
you know, and I really do try to respect the fact. The last thing I ever want to do is be the reason why somebody ever lost their religious convictions. But at the same time, I try to make it clear that I've seen religion do more damage within my lifetime. Okay, let me word that differently. I've seen the people who hold religion to the highest regard do more damage within my lifetime than I've seen the opposite of that. And so, when it comes to me, and at one point in my life, I was even in training to be a preacher. I went through different classes to actually be a minister of one sort, and I just did not fit the bill because I could not bring myself to just take one side or the other. There's always been a gray area to me.
Mm.
But as you say, compartmentalize. You got to find something else interesting to talk about with these people, and it's not always an easy thing to do.
Yeah, and
But
and I think it's a testament to your abilities as a podcaster that you can. You're here on talking to me. We'll be doing OTC later. There's Mincast, and then there's Three Fat Truckers, which I think is I think that's a commendable virtue that you have, and I think that's the closest you're going to get to a compliment from me, Bill. No, I am
well, that
just
was
joking.
quite a big deal. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm just joking. No, I no, I mean, I think it is important if you straddle different worlds to keep your relationships and your friendships going in those different worlds. I think it's important, and that's the only way. Even if you didn't have any intention of trying to change people, it is the only way you can change people, because people will remember your character and people will remember your fortitude and your clarity and stuff far more. People will remember how you made them feel more than the words that you say.
Right.
And I remember hearing that from someone, and I thought that is a damn good line. We'll finish off with just one back to Linux question, which is,
Okay.
what distro are you using?
Ooh.
You're on a podcast called Mintcast, right?
So
which
as
distro are
we
you using?
speak, the distro that is running on this machine that I am talking to you on is Linux Mint 22.1. I have several machines, however. These two servers behind my left shoulder are running Ubuntu server 2404. Yeah, LTS 2404. I've got a Raspberry Pi. Well, two Raspberry Pis. They're both running the most recent version of Raspberry Pi OS. Two laptops. Here goes. Two laptops that I take on the road with me. They run. There's this distro out there called Arch Linux.
Oh, really? I've
That,
never heard of that.
that's the one you were waiting on.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a for anybody that's not in this world. It's Arch is a distro that is. How do I explain this? It's got this. There's a culture of sort of taking the piss out of people that use it just a little bit, because for a long time, people that use Arch were very good at letting you know that they used Arch, and
It's like veganism. How do you know someone's a vegan? Because they tell you.
because they tell you,
Yeah.
or if they're in CrossFit or anything
Yeah.
like that.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, that's the other thing I was gonna say. It's like Arch Linux is like the triathlon that people do just for the sake of it. It's like, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do that and I'm gonna train to do this. Why? Just because I want to. And it's like, do you not like your bed? Have you got something against Netflix? Do you not like eating food? There's more interesting hobbies that you can have. I had one of my junior doctors the other day, and I was chatting to her, and she was like, "Oh, I'm just sorry, I'm just a bit preoccupied. I'm just reading this. What are you reading? Oh, I've got an exam this week." I'm like, "Oh, it's not this week for the fellowship exams." And she goes, "Oh no, I've already got that." Okay, so what exam are you doing then? Oh, this. See, I get bored, and so every year or so, I find some other kind of European diploma of medicine to do. And I'm like, I think you need to get a better hobby than just doing exams.
hey, there's no accounting for the things people get fulfillment out of, though.
Yeah.
And in the case of Arch Linux, it was for me. It's a distro that is quite simply no more and no less than what you put on it, and it serves the purpose of being on a machine that I take on the road with me, because it needs to be. It's its resource intensiveness is very austere. It does not do anything in the background that you don't know about unless you put services on there to run in the
Mm-hmm.
background, and it doesn't check for updates automatically or anything like that. It's basically it fills the need for what I need of a machine when I'm on the road, and it's tethered to my phone, so I got to make sure it's using as little internet as possible, So, and
Mm.
then I think the reason a lot of that culture exists where people talk about it so much is because whenever you talk about something that an operating system is doing, there's always this opportunity to say, yeah, oh, that's interesting because on Arch, they do this, this, and this, and it works a little bit better on Arch like this and this, because it is you've got everybody the way everybody else does it in the Linux world, and then the way it's done on Arch, which is usually kind of a do-it-yourself kind of thing, and I think that's how people fall in the trap of talking about it all the time, is because it is different from everything else.
Yeah. There's no greater zealot than the convert. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
So on that unbelievable bombshell that Bill runs Arch, by the way. I'd like to thank
Go look
Bill
that up,
for
folks.
like to thank Bill for his time. Thanks
Yeah,
for
thank you.
talking. It's been fascinating as it always is, and thank you very much. And all the best with your podcasts.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me on. Had a great time.
You too. Cheers. Bye bye.